Hey there guys, it's Metro, and I've really been loving patch 7.2 since it's come out a few days ago now. I really am feeling like this is the most fun I've ever had in the first week of a patch. And a lot of that is because I didn't spend a ton of time on the PTR and didn't ruin a lot of it for me, but also because this patch contains a lot of small changes that weren't highly publicized or discussed prior to the release. So that is a very exciting thing when you can even make a list like this with multiple small changes that I wasn't even fully aware of until I took a deep look at the patch notes or actually started playing. Hopefully you guys are in the same boat. So here is top 5 lesser known changes that have a high impact in 7.2. Number 5 on the list for me is the potion material cut in cost, as well as Blood of Sargeras's role in all of this. We're going to talk a little bit more about these topics later on in the list, but as a baseline, hopefully everybody did see that the potions, Old War, etc., had their material requirements cut in half. This is a pretty big change, but a lot of people did know about this. What a lot of people didn't know about, and they didn't even seem to talk about, was that the Blood of Sargeras shoulder enchant seems to just be way more prevalent now. I get Blood of Sargeras from that almost every hour, if not every half hour when I'm on the Broken Shore, when I'm doing world quests, etc. It's hard to say 100% that they buffed the drop rate of it, but I have gotten an absolute ton of bloods since the patch alone. Easily doubled what I had in the prior week, if not the prior 2-3 weeks put together. So on top of the Blood of Sargeras availability, as well as making potions a lot more easier to make, I find myself being suddenly flooded with the herbs I need to be able to do Mythic 5-mans all day and use Old War pots on every pull that requires it. Number 4, the world now scales to your item level as well as character level. Much to the chagrin of many individuals, Blizzard has decided that it is time to push item level scaling tech into the game as well. A lot of it was bugged, long story short, and has been reverted, but there are some noticeable changes that still are in the game, particularly on the bottom end. A lot of people are saying that they're running into situations where the character that they've been playing for a long time that's very high item level is not affected by this at all. But people who have not been playing diligently and are in the mid-tier of item levels, they're the ones being affected. For me, it was the complete opposite. When I played my paladin, I actually struggled to complete things. It felt like I was not doing as much damage as I could be proportionally, and that they simply tuned the world mobs a little bit higher. When I went on my Death Knight, who was considerably about 30 item levels lower, I was able to do everything that my DK or that my paladin was doing at about the same speed. So I think that's a really good change. If that's it working as intended, that means my lower eye level ults will not take any longer to get through the intro especially, but also get through the world quest each week. I know a lot of people aren't a huge fan of this change, but frankly, if you continued to let the item level scaling go as it was unchecked, eventually you would actually be one-shotting old world quest mobs with a single melee, and that is just not acceptable. Think about the item level range that we had in this expansion. We started at 800 and will well be over 1000 by the end. That's a problem in and of itself, but as of right now, I think this is one of the smartest changes they can make, as long as they don't go overboard, which they did, and they reverted. The thing that's most interesting to me here, though, is that they did not tell almost anyone about this. They claim they did this on purpose because they wanted people to log on to the PTR and notice it for themselves. The fact that they're claiming this is either a lie or a very potent statement about the actual problem, that being, there is none. People played on the PTR by the hundreds, if not thousands a day, and not a single person reported it. That's a pretty big statement to make, so we won't speculate on whether or not that's impactful or not. But regardless, what we will talk about is how to notice this is working. They have reverted part of it, so it's difficult to say exactly what still is in the game. But as of yesterday, what we did was run up to a mob, don't enter in combat with us, take off some of your gear, and then notice how much the health changed. I took off my artifact weapon, and the mob dropped in about half the health that it had. Don't forget, the artifact weapon I have is a two-hander and about half my item level, so that seems pretty proportionate. That's actually quite cool, because if that works that way, then that means that you could probably dip lower than the intended eye level for anything in this expansion and still be able to quest out there. That may lead to some odd twinking situations or just some weird fun situations that you can make out of this system. It's not all bad if you're somebody who's worried about this, but I think it's actually a really good change. Number 3, the Lavish Suramar Feast, as well as general Nomi changes. Hopefully you guys have seen seen by now that there is a new way to improve your character's power, especially in a raid, but in any situation where you would use a food buff. They doubled, if not tripled, the actual stat allocations from the Hearty Feast and the Lavish Suramar Feast. I believe they were 100 and 150 main stat prior, and I think, what, 200 and 250 stam? You were able to now get 400 and 500 respectively, and 750 stam from the Lavish Suramar Feast. On top of this, if you're a Pandaren, I assume you still get double. If anyone can confirm or deny that, please do so. But I feel like if that's the case, then that gives 1,000 intellect for a Pandaren caster. That surely is now the best race in the game thanks to this feast buff. In my opinion, this is the biggest feast we've ever had, proportionate to other food and to other options. It's almost half the amount of an actual flask, which is really insane. They are a bit of a problem to make, but luckily with some Nomi changes, you should be in much better shape now. On the screen, you'll see the Nomi situation, but essentially you get some extra incentive to continue doing the work orders. Every once in a while, you'll get some materials that can combine into a specific food. It doesn't seem very common, but it is a nice little consolation. On top of that, Nomi no longer burns food to a crisp. He also, every time he fails a work order, you still get some type of food. Even though it's not in any way useful, it can still be eaten, and it's much better than just getting a trash vendor item. Number 2 is the widest subject of all: redistribution of mob count and overall changes in mythic pluses. The highly publicized changes that we knew were coming with 7.2 were removal of one affix and addition of a few new ones. We knew this would change the complexity and landscape of Mythic Plus dungeons, but what we did not know was that there would be a massive redistribution of mob count, including mob positioning, and some big overall changes to how AP systems and some of the mechanics and affixes already work in Mythic Pluses especially. One thing that you'll notice when you're doing, say, Halls of Valor is all of these things put together. The mob count has been vastly redistributed. For example, the final 4 mobs prior to the last 2 bosses now actually give mob count. They give about 4%. In turn, they have removed some of the patrols and non-essential mobs in Halls of Valor, making it a lot easier to not overkill on mob count, but also make bigger skips if it's needed. This is really cool, and you'll see this in almost every dungeon. I think easily one of the coolest changes that could ever come to 5-mans at this point, because this allows you to be way more tactical about what you pull and way more skilled in what you pull. It's a lot harder to just say, let's avoid these mobs now and get the mob count we need. Now, in order to get under mob count, you would probably have to use either a rogue or an invis pot, and that is a very good thing for the landscape overall, although not something I'm a huge fan of. On top of this, especially in Halls of Valor, on the screen you'll see the AP changes per dungeon. It's a quite complicated system, and one that a lot of people did know about, but what we didn't necessarily know about was exactly how it was going to flesh out. They said you're going to get more AP based on the difficulty and the length of the dungeon. So immediately that told me that Halls of Valor would be one of the best, because the timer in there is very long, but it's not really needed. It's actually one of the easier ones to complete in 3 chests because of how long that timer is, but you still get Blizzard's reward from it. Very, very good value there if you have a Halls of Valor key. Unfortunately, one of the big changes was that they absolutely slaughtered mob souls. They changed the mob count around a bit and made the place a little bit harder as well, and now as you see on the chart there, you get almost no artifact power compared to anything else. A mod 10 is actually lower than a 6 in some dungeons, and that is insane. They also changed some of the affixes. Unfortunately, the only ones I can confirm right now are Volcanic. If you guys have done Volcanic this week, you would see that Volcanic no longer spawns directly underneath you every single time. Previously, if you were fighting a lot of mobs, it would commonly spawn 2 or 3 directly underneath you, and there would be no way you can survive that. Now they'll spawn staggered, either around you in a triangle or maybe to your left or right. This allows you to either pick and choose if you don't want to move too much and can eat the damage, or actually can make it a little bit harder to get out of all of them. It's a very smart, dynamic change, and one that I think is going to change the way people do some of these mechanics. I assume a lot of the affixes have changed, so if you guys have done this in the future, please let me know which ones have in the comments below. Before we move on to number 1, I would like to give out an honorable mention to lighting and color changes in some zones. If you play the game as much as I do, you get used to how things look look. And when I logged in 7.2 and did some exploring to do some world quests, I noticed that some zones just look a little bit different. It's hard to exactly pin down. I'm not any way technically sound on this topic, so I can't tell you exactly what's changed. Maybe you guys can. If so, please do so. But regardless, I have noticed a marked difference in some zones. Hopefully I'll have screenshots on the screen there for you guys to take a look at. Really, in some areas, the light just seems a little bit warmer, and it's almost like if they reshaded some of the way that the light and atmosphere interacts with the actual game itself. But either way, it's a very noticeable difference in some areas, and I love to think that World of Warcraft is innovating from a graphics department daily. Number 1 is my favorite change overall, and that is Herb, Ore, and Blood of Sargeras supplements from the Broken Shore as well as Centinax. So all the while leading up to 7.2, people were talking about farming Nether Shards. Everybody was vastly focused on that topic because there was a lot of ways that you could get player power from doing so. The big goal there was Centinax. Everybody told me about how crazy farming in front of Centinax was going to be, and although overwhelming at first, it's actually really fun once you get the hang of it. We spent a good hour out there yesterday, and I can tell you I actually enjoyed doing it. But what I really enjoyed was getting beacons that actually have the ship drop Blood of Sargeras, Fell Slate, or Starlight Rose. That alone is one of the coolest changes the game has ever come up with. Those things are pretty rare if you're not aware what they are, and Blood of Sargeras, like we talked about earlier in the list, is one of the highest impact things that are in the game right now. Getting even one could be a very nice thing. So being able to farm this for Nether Shards, something you'll probably already be doing, and getting some herbs and ore and other materials out of it just naturally is one of the smartest changes I think Blizzard has ever made to world content. I love the way it feels like you can get multiple things done at once on this island, and even more so, even cooler is this change. So they have added the worm tongue caches now to the map. This is not something that came with the patch, but was a hotfix afterwards. These worm tongue caches obviously contain Nether Shards and Legion Fall war supplies, but the cooler thing about it is, while going around for this as an herbalist or a miner, I am seeing hundreds and hundreds of nodes for herbs and mining things. It's very cool because when you mine some Fell Slate or herb, these random herbs, you not only get the herb itself and a chance of Blood of Sargeras if you're proficient, you can also get some Nether Shards. So it's really turned into this giant exploration Easter egg hunt for me. I'm just roaming around on my death knight, grabbing up all the herbs and worm tongue chests that I can get, and actually getting something out of it besides just herbs. Honestly, I cannot speak enough about this change. I have had so much fun doing this. It seems like such a casual, fun thing to do just when you have no real goals for your time or character. Or for example, yesterday we were waiting for another player to log back on so we can do some more Mythic Plus carries. So instead, in that hour, I just roamed around, got a bunch of random herbs thanks to the herb change on the island, and got a bunch of Blood of Sargeras and other materials that I needed. So that's the list. What'd you think? These were things that I was not aware was coming to the patch because I haven't spent an extensive amount of time on the PTR, but also because some of them weren't made very obvious. Even when reading the patch notes, it's easy to gloss over some of them. Hopefully you guys agree with some of them, but if you disagree with them, have you found anything else that should be in their place? I'd love to hear even more things about lesser known changes that even I may not be aware of at this point. So I think 7.2 is one of the best patches ever so far, and hopefully you guys can find even more reasons to make it so. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next video.